Yesterday, Misinformation and I finally got to see the new James Bond movie, No Time to Die. Talk about a long wait to get to see that movie, right? I think it was originally April of 2020, so it's been almost 2 years since then. I think it was worth the wait. But anyway, in the movie, there was a tie-in to Nokia phones, as well, of course, as to Omega's Seamaster Pro 300, which I absolutely love, and check out this video if you want to see why. And that got me thinking about GM's recent announcement that they'll be doing about $90 billion in sales of EVs, aspirationally, of course, by 2030. If GM and Tesla's numbers hold true, that would mean GM will be at about 15% of Tesla sales by then. And that's kind of a best case scenario. So anyway, that all got me thinking once again about how fast market share can truly collapse and how, especially in durable goods like autos, that transition can actually be masked by what's already out there. So let's think about Nokia and Norway and Europe and the US and global EV sales and consider how quickly things can and likely will go bad for legacy auto, and how we consumers will likely be the last to know about it. For those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So first of all, I want to point out that I don't know why I didn't wear this shirt in my last episode that I filmed, which is up here, by the way, if you want to check it out. But anyway, it was about Tesla and Texas and don't mess with Tesla, and I don't know why I didn't wear the shirt. But anyway, I didn't. So I'm wearing it today to make up for that. It's in the merch store if you want to check out the link in the description. So I want to start off with thinking about Nokia phones versus, well, what's out there right now, Apple iPhones and a huge amount of Android phones as well. So for those of you who are a bit too young to remember, in the 1990s and into the mid-2000s, Nokia was the dominant cell phone platform, the hardware manufacturer that made most of the phones. So for example, in 2007, Nokia sold 49.4% of all the phones sold in the world. So think about that. That's massive. That's 1 in 2 phones. But 2007 happens to be a very special year, and I'm sure many of you remember that was the year that the iPhone was introduced. And then very quickly, Android sort of existed before the iPhone was introduced, but Android very, very rapidly turned into an iPhone clone after that point. So 2007, 8, etc., that was the area where these smartphones, the kinds of phones we're used to now, the big slabs with the interfaces where you can do whatever you want to, became very popular. So in 2007, as the iPhone was introduced, Nokia had half, 1 out of every 2 phones sold in the world was a Nokia phone. In 2008, it was 43.7. And by the way, I'm getting this information from a BBC article. You can check out the link in the description. Anyway, in 2008, 43.7%. In 2009, 41.1%. In 2010, 34.2%. And then by 2013, it was down to 3% of all global phone sales. So in 6 years, Nokia went from selling 1 out of every 2 phones in the globe to selling 1 out of every 33 phones sold. In 6 years, that's just no time at all. It's like nothing. And now, using a recent article from InsideEVs.com, let's take a look at EV versus ICE car sales in Norway, which is kind of a leading indicator of EV trends in the world because they're very, very forward-thinking. So first of all, for the year in 2021, plug-ins, which means plug-in hybrid electric vehicles or fully battery electric vehicles, are at 84% of Norway's market share. So that's really huge, right? And in 2014, it was about 10%. So in 7 years, it's gone from 10% to 84%. So we're seeing, essentially that S curve that I've talked about. You can check that out if you're interested, if you want to. But anyway, we're seeing that S curve adoption happen very, very rapidly, and it's actually not really slowing down. If we look at September, battery electric vehicles, only battery electric vehicles, were at 77.5%, and plug-in hybrids were down to 13.9%, which is 91.4% of market share. So in September, which is the last month we have full records for, in Norway, 3/4 of cars were battery cars only, without any kind of gas engine at all, and over 9/10 of the cars were at least plug-in. So they were either plug-in hybrids or they were battery electric vehicles. And you can also see from these statistics how plug-in hybrids are kind of a stopgap because their market share, of course, went up very quickly and now is declining very rapidly as people are just getting battery electric vehicle cars. So plug-in hybrids have a little bit of a window in the world where they're going to sell, but they're very rapidly going to contract and become sort of like ICE cars. They'll become rather niche cars. So anyway, as of September, 9 out of 10 of all cars sold in Norway, greater than 9 out of 10 of all cars sold in Norway, are plug-in vehicles now, right? So what are the consequences? You might think of this as like an apocalyptic change and everything has changed rapidly, but it's not as much as you might think. I have a very kind viewer who watches from Norway, and he sort of gave me some information about all of this. Because I asked him very specifically, I said, are petrol stations or gas stations, are they disappearing? What's happening with all of that? And he said, no, you actually don't see that many BEVs on the road right now, because the deal is that, of course, that cars are durable goods. They last a long time. So let's say a decade. It actually can be longer than that, but let's just say 10 years just for a nice easy round number. So essentially, 10 years ago, 100% of the Norwegian market was ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles. So that was 2011, right? So by 2014, we're looking at 10% being that. So even in 2014, 90% of the market was ICE vehicles. And all of those cars from 2011, et cetera, well, not all of them, but a lot of those cars are still on the road. So essentially what's happening is kind of a masking function that's going on. You've got all of these new car sales that are happening that are going towards plug-in vehicles, but a lot of the cars, I don't have an exact number, but maybe let's say like 70 to 80% of the cars still on the road are ICE cars, right? And plus, of course, you've got things like, heavier trucks, and you've got things like semis and all of that kind of stuff that are still going to be using gas for quite a while, or diesel for quite a while. So anyway, there's a rather large masking function that's going on, which is basically that you've got this sort of trailing thing you're bringing along of ICE vehicles that's going to be there. So what's going to happen is, you really, even if the last ICE car is sold in Norway in 2022, and yeah, there's some things that people have just made a linear function and showed it to go to zero. It's not going to go to zero in 2022, but it will get smaller and smaller. So it's going to become vanishingly small in the next couple of years for passenger vehicles, but you're not going to see all the petrol stations in the entire country just disappear all at once, because and all of the service stations as well that, service ICE engines, etc. But anyway, you're not going to see all of that happen instantly, because you've got these things with sort of a 10-year trailing thing, right? So you're looking at sort of like a 10-year trailing average that's going on. So what will happen is it's going to decrease more slowly, but at this point it's inevitable. There's no way that that's going to stop, because of course, once people buy these cars, they don't go back to gas cars again. So the country is going to essentially become 100% at least plug-in electric. It's whether that's some hybrids and things like that, but battery electric vehicles. Anyway, over the next couple of years, it's basically going to become only that. And as it does that, there's going to be less and less need for petrol. There's going to be less and less need for diesel. There's going to be less and less need for those stations. So those stations are going to start changing. And my friend that lives in Norway said that he's seeing the charging stations are starting to appear at, gas stations. So anyway, all of that is going on, but it's not happening as fast as you think. And the other sort of confounding factor about Norway is that it's a relatively small market, and they don't have an auto producing industry there themselves very much. So in other words, what's happening is you're seeing all of these changes, but it's really not having that much of a ripple effect at this point. But let's project now out to like Europe as a whole, and the United States, and other markets as well, like China, especially since that's the largest market out there. What's going to happen is, as those markets head, like Norway is, towards fully battery electric vehicles, or at least plug-in electric hybrids, you're going to start to see things happen. There's going to be a much bigger ripple effect that's going to happen immediately as that goes on, right? So let's just do the same thing. Let's say 7 years. So given country X, it doesn't really matter what country that is, but let's say that's a country like Germany or the United States or China that produces a lot of ICE vehicles. So let's say we're at 10% right now, and we follow Norway's trend. It's actually probably going to be faster than that, honestly. But if we follow Norway's trend and we go from 10 to 80% or 85% in 7 years, we're at 2021 right now. So let's say by the end of the decade, just to be generous, by 2030, we've got no real ICE sales going on. What's going to happen, of course, is there are still a lot of ICE cars that are moving through, the pipeline, essentially. They're out there, they've been built, people have purchased them, they need to service them, they're driving around, they need to fill them up with gasoline or diesel or whatever. So all of that is going to have a masking effect, but the consequence that's going to be really, really critical is what happened to Nokia. And you saw this in their market share. It doesn't really matter if people were still using Nokia phones in 2013, right? Maybe they just had old phones and they were still using it. What matters is this quarter's sales. If you don't sell cars or you don't sell phones in that quarter, you have no revenue. And that means that you don't get anything out of it. So all of these legacy manufacturers are sort of like Nokia. Nokia became very complacent in the early 2000s. They were like, we got the best phones. Nobody's going to compete with us. We're just selling like gangbusters. Everything's good. Don't worry about innovation. Legacy auto, for a lot longer than Nokia did, was very, very complacent. They're just like, everything's cool. We're just going to keep going the way it is. We'll keep the ship going in a straight line. Everything is great. No big deal, right? But the problem is when this disruption happens, they're not ready for it. They're lazy. They're not prepared. They weren't thinking ahead. And it's very difficult to, turn that really, really big ship. And so what happens is they've got to make a transition to electric vehicles because, as Norway is indicating, things are going to happen very, very rapidly when it does switch. But at the same time, they don't have the infrastructure set up to do that right now. So they're sort of like Nokia that scrambled. They said like, oh my gosh, we've got to make a transition to this other type of phone, right? To the kind of standard tablet smartphone that we all have now. But they didn't do it fast enough. They were unable to do it. And then, of course, they went with Windows instead of going with Android, which was a huge mistake. So anyway, they made drastic mistakes, which is part of what's going on. But, you can see that with GM. GM has made deals with Nikola and with Lordstown Motors, right? I don't think either of those was a very good idea. So that desperation causes them to reach out and make bad deals, just like Nokia made a bad deal with Microsoft and doing the Windows Phone back in 2000. I think it was 10 when they made that transition. But anyway, the deal is that we've got this masking effect. The world is going to still look very much the same after ICE sales have pretty much petered out into nothing. And that's because we've got these durable goods that last for at least a decade, and those are still going to be driving on the road. So people are going to be driving those cars, and you're not going to see 100%, right? It's not just, if you had 100% EV sales in one quarter, that does not translate into 100% of cars driving on the road that are EVs. It's only going to be a tiny fraction of that because every year you don't sell the entire fleet over again. You just sell a tiny fraction of that fleet. Let's say 1/10 of the fleet, just to keep the numbers even, right? So it takes 10 years to build that up. So what'll happen is we'll get to a point where there's hardly any ICE sales anymore globally, but there will still be tons of ICE cars on the road. So service stations will still be in existence and gas stations will still be in existence. But those things are going to go away inevitably because there are no more cars coming into the pipeline to fill that need. And more importantly than that, auto manufacturers that are making ICE cars are not going to be able to sell them. And that is going to be the massive effect. And again, Norway is a small market. They don't really have a big auto manufacturing industry, so you don't notice this that much with them. But if you take a country like Germany and they suddenly don't have auto sales anymore, that's VW, that's BMW, that's all of the brands that VW controls, that's Mercedes, etc. That is a lot of their industry that is going to be drastically affected. If you have 100% EV sales, all of those companies are only making a tiny fraction of their cars as EVs. And it doesn't matter if all the cars on the road still look like they're ICE cars. All the cars that people are buying that quarter are EVs. And if that's the case, it doesn't really matter to these companies whether ICE cars are still on the road because they're not making any sales anymore. And of course, it's not like these companies are not recognizing this now. GM just had a giant meeting. VW just had a crisis meeting because they said, oh gosh, we're in really, really big trouble. So they're starting to wake up to this, but this is in the same boat as what Nokia did in, let's say, 2008, 2009, when they realized their market share was collapsing. They said, oh gosh, we got to do something, but it was pretty much too late by then. I don't know, maybe these companies, because all of this takes a lot longer, phones are much, much easier to build than cars are, and you can make a lot more of them, etc. So the market share can change, a little bit more rapidly in terms of things like phones because they're much smaller and easier to make, relatively speaking. I know it's not like phones are easy to make, but anyway, they don't take as much batteries for one thing. But what I'm seeing is that the likes of Ford, GM, VW, et cetera, Toyota, my goodness, what is Toyota doing? They're doing nothing, so they're really going to collapse. But anyway, you're seeing all of these companies suddenly go like, oh gosh, we've got to do something, but it's kind of too late. And their market share is collapsing, which means that their revenue is collapsing, which means that they don't have the money to put into creating these new vehicles and hiring the new people and retooling their factories or making completely new factories and coming up with the technology and coming up with the software, because of course cars are becoming very, very much software driven nowadays. So all of those things are compounding on these companies, and it really doesn't matter if we're not seeing on the roads 100% electric vehicles, because as they sell more and more electric vehicles, as their percentage of market share goes up, the percentage of market share of ICE vehicles goes down, and that has a very, very compounding negative feedback loop on all of these legacy auto manufacturers. So while all the petrol stations in Norway have not gone away yet, and as we're not seeing everything change instantly around the world, that doesn't really matter, because what's happening is the auto manufacturers' sales, the auto sales are going to collapse. They are collapsing. They've already collapsed in Norway, or they've switched over, right? The ICE sales have collapsed and the EV sales have gone through the roof. And everywhere else that's going to follow that same trend. And I think it'll probably be quicker in the rest of the world. So it probably won't be 8 years, 7 or 8 years. It might be only 5 or 6 years for the rest of the world to catch up that rapidly. It depends a lot on battery production and how many batteries can be made. But anyway, so even being generous, by 2030, all of these things are going to come home to roost. In the meantime, during the 2020s, it's going to look for a long time to us consumers like nothing is going on, because we're still going to see a lot of ICE cars driving around on the roads. We're going to see people in gas stations. We're going to see people in service stations getting serviced, and on and on. But what will be the leading indicator is these legacy auto manufacturers are going to have their market share collapse, and they're going to either die or get bought out or get saved by their governments, or something along those lines is going to happen. And that's going to happen much more quickly than we consumers actually see it happening in the broader landscape. So anyway, to all the legacy auto manufacturers, it may be too late already, but if it's not, you really need to think about Nokia in the mid 2000s and what happened to them in a mere 6 years, going from 50% market share to 3% market share in 6 years, and now trying to advertise in James Bond movies and hoping that somebody actually still notices the fact that Nokia even exists as a company, which I didn't even know. So, now they're just another Android manufacturer that's out there and not even a very good one. But that's exactly what can happen to all of these really big brands right now. They can just disappear, and people can say like, oh yeah, I remember when Toyota was a brand that people bought, right? Nobody does anymore. It really doesn't matter what you're selling today. It matters what you're selling tomorrow. And if you get 4 or 5 quarters of you not really selling any of your ICE cars, you're going to either collapse or become a real niche player. And of course, in the meantime, Tesla and all of the other new EV companies that are making these EVs are going to take all of that market share from you. So anyway, these are really harsh lessons to learn, but it's well past time for legacy auto to wake up and really start thinking about this. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and thought-provoking. If you did, definitely like it so other people can find it. I've also got a whole bunch of stuff. I have people who went to the Giga Berlin thing yesterday and had a blast. They're sending me a bunch of information. I'm going to try to compile that and talk about that in a video later this week. So definitely consider subscribing if you want to see that one. Of course, as always, a huge thank you to my patrons on Patreon, specifically about the Germany thing, because I have a patron on Patreon who went to it and she is sending me a whole bunch of information. She's amazing. So thank you to her in advance. I will tell you more about that on the Germany episode. But anyway, thank you so much for that. And of course, if any of you out there are interested in joining, definitely check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in some awesome merch, check out the link in the description. We've got the Tesla Bot t-shirt, which is super popular these days. Don't mess with Tesla. Lots of other t-shirts, tumblers, mugs, etc. So check out the link in the description and help the channel out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how clicking on a link and going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. And as always, feel free to ask me questions in the comments or at my email address, which is drknowitallknows@gmail.com. Till next time, bye-bye.